What are your thoughts on the rising trend of live action remakes of animated films?
So my feeling is that I'm not really interested in them. I haven't seen many of them.
Well. Live action remakes, love to hate them. Are they inherently pointless? Why do they keep spawning? Who are these people? All this time and money wasted on proving how much whoever hired doesn't understand why art is good and loved. We, as an audience mostly unaware of the logistical and practical scope that is a film production, won't fully understand how much of a monumental waste live action remakes are until we literally step into a practical set the size of a city block made for a movie that will only be remembered for how terrible it was. This guy agrees. We know the drill at this point. Something exists, people love it, it's remade a decade or two later, everyone hates it, box office domination, Big Joel has another breakdown, the endless cycle of vocalized anger persists, providing a soulless imitation of its undeserved relevance, with the period between the original and its evil clone shortening at an alarming rate. How to Train Your Dragon was pretty much due, and unlike something like The Lion King, it doesn't feel as much like a story that could only be told through animation. Makes more sense though. Like it's easier to just draw a dragon without it needing to be photorealistic, allowing stylization into the mix, often resulting in said stylization becoming part of the appeal. What happens now that you can practically make anything believable in live action if you've got the right vision for it? Live action dragons are commonplace now anyways. I'd say the challenge would be the quantity of dragons on screen, making it a question of rendering budget, which I believe director Dean DeBlois to have earned the resources to make that a possibility. Basically, it's the third act of Avatar with extra budget for fire simulation. How many franchises get to be defined and remembered for the collaborative gold made by its director and composer who understood the power behind the right mixture of image and sound? If you're going to have DreamWorks' best composer to score your film, you're going to make sure the musical cues hit just right and plot about it over the storyboards to make the moment be the best it can be. These two get it and made DreamWorks' masterpiece out of what was apparently a very rushed production. It's quite a story. Now, I see you Shrek lovers and you're sort of valid, but when we talk about How to Train Your Dragons, it's not about the memes, it's the artistry, John Powell's score, the impeccable directing, elements without which this franchise could have barely walked, qualities now secured into its remake mainly thanks to that director-composer duo returning. And just like that, we have one of my most anticipated movies of 2025. I dread the very concept otherwise. Dean DeBlois tethered his craft so tightly to shooting fictional reptilians that even studios agreed not to do this without him. Someone also agreed that John Powell was this franchise's other backbone, giving every single scene its needed wings. There's something about Dean DeBlois' direction for this dragon feature that makes it very difficult to imagine anyone else nearly as stylistically appropriate to take over for its live-action counterpart, especially due to his filmmaking already being so live-action ready. Like, what do you mean by his first live-action feature film? You'd think he's already been about that long before. This trilogy exudes the energy of a stylistically refined director having a go at animation, bringing this grounded visual approach, often emulating handheld filmmaking or adding that slight jitter to the camera during flight sequences as if shot with a real camera flying against the wind, trying to keep Toothless in frame, extending the franchise's photorealism to not only the rendering, but also to the camera manipulation, if that makes any sense. Take away the skies, which might have well been inserted photographs or the naturalistic atmosphere in nearly every backdrop. Dean's consciousness in implementing every real camera notion into the animation created this visual authenticity, making it come off as if captured in cam by some documentary filmmaker, channeling James Cameron at times. Dean's also a master of scale. Leave it to excellent lens manipulation to make up for the Green Death's smaller size compared to his book counterpart, described as being so large that you'd mistake it for another mountain through the mist. This does just the job with what I'd qualify as high-tier kaiju filmmaking. I'd throw a tantrum over Roger Deakins not returning for this as an actual cinematographer if they didn't hire my second favorite working DP to fill the slot. If we're to qualify Bill Pope as the type of cinematographer who's as great as the director with whom he works with, then we're in for a likely treat. Safe to say that you're not exactly coming to a Robert Rodriguez movie for the cinematography, yet Alita still had the sauce, rich in those Bill Popeisms. His talent in creating painterly, softly lit, off-centered portraits combined with Dean's excellent knack for mise-en-scène assures that this film's good looks will rest just as much on the flight sequences as on Pope's excellent handling of people in rooms just talking. Before I could even worry about him not being as moody as Roger, several sequences from the Raimiverse, the whole Matrix trilogy, and moments from Baby Driver came to mind, proving him to be just as atmospherically potent as that Oscar-winning cinematographer. I just got attached to Bill Pope's capturing of alleyways, warehouses, and his use of other urban assets for natural framing, so I just worry about not recognizing what I grew to love about him through forests and mountains. That the Kid Who Would Be King movie he shot could be the closest point of reference for what the Dragon remake could look like, featuring more natural landscapes than the average Bill Pope project. But I think that'd be setting the bar a little too low, no offense, not to bash what might actually be a cute film for no reason. It's far from the ugliest mid-budget movie I've seen, but I'd expect some stronger photography coming from Dean's direction, hoping for the mood and grit of the original film not to be omitted by the adaptation. As long as it's all given the necessary depth and texture through good lighting combined with proper wardrobe and production design for it to better stand on its own and not feel like the How to Train Your Dragon stage play or a Netflix remake of a beloved animated show. Having spent a decade directing what are arguably DreamWorks' best-looking films, promises a transition to live action as seamless as Brad Bird's, looking competent at worst or at best, proving Dean to be the visionary as which he was meant to be regarded. May we pray for his adamance in translating the appeal of his computer-generated photography into his live-action directing. Watching that depressing Spike Jonze-directed kids film over the weekend was not in my initial plans, but I couldn't believe how visually YTTYD coded this movie is, having what I find to be the most adequate look for a Dragon's remake with its gorgeous naturalistic lighting, muted autumnal color grade, crunchy forest scenery, and even creature design, which brings me to my next point. What are we gonna do with Nico Marlet's iconic dragon designs? Probably the franchise's flashiest component and naturally a challenge to translate in live action. After having thought about it for a while, believing that grounding those quirky designs to better fit the live-action medium would be the right thing to do, I now dare them to indulge in the aesthetic clash between a live-action Berg villager and what would basically be a photorealistic cartoon, sort of like this other Bill Pope project. I think there's a compelling statement in representing the Vikings as traditionalists shown through this austere, muted palette in contrast to the dragons, colorful and cartoonishly flamboyant, symbolizing the antithesis and rejection of said tradition. The fluorescent missing piece for Berk to thrive as a village as it later would in the series. I'm not overthinking it because whatever they do with their dragons pretty much dictates what kind of movie we're getting. You're obviously gonna get two very different experiences depending on whether you take the Game of Thrones route or go with Dragons by Dr. Seuss. Being a sucker for an aesthetic challenge, I choose the latter. Trash on Tim Burton's Alice all you want. It's at least a visually courageous film, showing that you can have cartoonish creature designs in your live-action feature as long as you have a compatible enough general aesthetic. Nico Marlet's interesting silhouettes add so much personality to the frame. Could you imagine sacrificing all that for the sake of realism? Imagine hating fun. Break the rules like Alita did. The Uncanny Valley is your oyster, where the wild things are. Cartoonish designs, realistic rendering. This is the way. At least I think so. I'm just a guy. As long as they don't just drag and drop the original designs in front of the lens, I'd like this to feel like a completely new production, thanks. I'm also curious to get to know Dean better now that he's not working with a medium regarded as fundamentally kid-oriented due to Hollywood being stupid and repressed. Stupidly repressed. Dean pretty much fought to amputate the kid and kill the dad, narrative decisions for which the franchise is now applauded for. What would he be like now without those inhibitions? He could be a Peter Jackson type and we'd have no clue yet. We can admittedly agree that a lot of the stuff that happens in Jackson's Lord of the Rings would not pass in mainstream animated form. I just wonder what's on the table this time. On-screen death by dragon, perhaps? Have the child Viking deaths only be implied so you can keep the PG rating. It might not be that deep, but I can't help but see good potential regarding it from a creative standpoint, and I'd hope that most of the people involved are thinking about all those elements at least half as much as I have. I'm just a little guy selling myself on the artistic merit of the How to Train Your Dragon remake without having seen a single frame, the brainpower that costs. I've DM'd you, Dean. I'll gladly support or be part of the only good remake in history of live-action remakes. I haven't seen The Jungle Book in a decade. It might secretly be mediocre on a rewatch, but I'd rather be wrong. Guess who shot that one? It's all connected. I think the writer-director of the original being back on the director's chair invites a healthier approach to the project, not likely to perform some narcissistic exercise of telling you how much they know about how much you like the film they once made. Maybe use different scenes to tell the same story or make the same points, only differently, maybe harping down in certain areas more than others this time around. Basically make another movie. I'd expect no less from a director having a nuanced opinion about remakes.
I think it's easy to go back to something that was successful, that a really talented team put a lot of years and hard work into, and then redo it without changing what worked.
Fantastic. My outlook over this project might diverge from Dean's more than I think. Obsessing over his movies doesn't mean I know the guy. I barely stalk him. I haven't yet found all the right interviews that could serve as a strong enough indicator of the mindset with which he took the project, but I got enough of a good vibe about his general filmic intentions, preventing this from fitting into the pile of bad remakes, assuming that his constantly great direction through the trilogy wasn't an accident and that he's aware of the reasons why his own movie worked as well as it did. This not being jam-packed with A-listers as cheap bait is also a green flag. This is the only live-action remake of an animated film for which I ever cared that much about, so I'll take the blessing of having the original director-composer pair returning in a heartbeat. I don't care if I'm being recklessly optimistic. Imagining this as the best case scenario of a remake is sort of creatively stimulating, so I'll surf on that feeling till a trailer drops. It'll be worth the possible betrayal that could be a genuinely awful first look, but I think it's gonna be okay. I think it's gonna be okay. I think it's gonna be okay. The How to Train Your Dragon remake is going to be okay. I'm gonna be okay. Or it could kill me, I don't know.